Welcome to Expressions of Leadership. I'm your host, Michele Kawamoto Perry. In every episode, we explore how people from educators and artists to executives and entrepreneurs lead with authenticity, rise through adversity, and share the wisdom they've gained along the way. Today's guest is Melinda Hsu, an Emmy-nominated television writer, producer, showrunner, author, and podcast host of Lead with Kindness. Melinda's career spans some of television's most influential series, including Lost, The Vampire Diaries, and Nancy Drew, as well as her current work on Fox's The Interrogator. But what makes her story especially compelling is not just the shows that she's worked on. It's what she learned inside the writers' rooms and production environments where storytelling, pressure, creativity, and collaboration all collide in real time. Melinda, welcome to Expressions of Leadership. It's so great to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you.
Now, Melinda, your parents came to the United States as Chinese refugees and immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
What lessons from their experience still stay with you today?
So many. I mean, a lot about perseverance and working towards a goal and like anything is possible. My dad actually used to say, he had a very strong Chinese accent, anything is possible in America. And he meant it, and I loved that. I also learned to don't complain. I mean, a lot of immigrant kids or kids of immigrants have a similar experience to mine, where it's sort of like when I was on the boat coming over from Taiwan and we were stuck on the sea in a typhoon for 3 days and we ran out of food and we had to make pancakes out of the flour that they broke out of the cargo hold with seawater that we used in our hands, and then so we got something to eat by watching the ship's chimney. Tell me again, you need a laser printer? Like that thing? Don't complain. But I love those stories. I mean, at the time, it was a lot of pressure because I was sort of like, oh, they've suffered so much, they've struggled so much, I can't possibly disappoint them. And that definitely drove me. And also their personalities were very unyielding is the word that comes to mind. I mean, I was very close with my mom. My dad, maybe not as much, but they both did their best and had very, very high expectations of themselves as well as me. So I owe a lot to them. They didn't initially understand why I wanted to become a writer or why I wanted to do anything that wasn't stable, like being a teacher or, anything that was remotely understandable to them. But eventually they got on board. At some point in my 20s, I was on the phone with them. I had been in LA struggling for years in the wilderness. And I kind of told my parents what I was up to. And oh, I'm going to do a table reading of my script that no one's bought. And, whatever. I was selling them. And my dad finally said, well, we tried to be happy for you. And then to my mom. But they did. They tried to be happy for me. And they eventually were very excited when I started getting paid. And now that I'm a parent, I understand much better the worry that you have that your kid's not going to be able to support themselves or they're going to be disappointed and unhappy. And, that was a tough road at the time, but it was worth it.
And you also grew up in Bangor, Maine,
Mm.
as the only non-white child in many of your environments.
Yes.
What was that experience like, and how did it shape how you saw yourself growing up?
Wow. I have an older brother who is great, but he was a couple grades ahead of me in school. And there were like occasionally there would be some other family in town that wasn't white. But in the state, I mean, we were so isolated as people who were not white. Maine is still predominantly white, but at the time, I feel like the statistic was like 0.05%. It wasn't even 1%. It
Wow.
was so uniform at that time. So I was really shy and timid and self-conscious because I didn't look like anybody. I was also very isolated. My parents weren't very outgoing. I mean, they had friends, but it wasn't like a bustling community of people. And regardless, I really preferred to stay inside and hide in my bedroom and read The Lord of the Rings over and over again. Because in those stories, if you were different, it was cool. And so I grew into this love of genre writing, and I was obsessed with Star Wars and Star Trek. And the first time I wrote fiction, I was a kid, I was 8 years old, and I wrote Star Trek fan fiction. I created this character where I was like a super genius telepathic telekinetic baby who got beamed up to the Enterprise by accident and had all these adventures with the crew. So I was creating community in my head. Also, I was really bored and it was like an escapist thing. But I told people about this story and they said, "What did your parents think of you as an 8-year-old sitting and writing these stories in longhand pencil spiral notebooks and not letting yourself go out to play in the summer until you'd written 5 more pages?" And I said, "I think they were just happy I wasn't sitting around enjoying being 8."
And you were really disciplined.
Yeah, yeah, they liked that. I mean, it was sweet. I still remember my mom would occasionally come home with a new little spiral notebook for me from CVS, you know. And so she was encouraging the artistic endeavors. Little did she know it would turn into a career to her dismay.
Did you always know that you wanted a creative career, or
Mm.
were there any tensions between your aspirations and expectations ultimately that were placed on you?
Yeah, my parents desperately wanted me to do something respectable. And I didn't know I wanted to be a writer. Well, initially I did. Like when I was a kid, if you'd asked me when I was 8 years old or 10 years old, I would have said, I'm going to write novels and live in Connecticut with 3 kids and kind of I imagined this house that my parents had taken us to visit a friend. And it had sort of a sunken living room. I don't know, it just had these, there was like a nice big hallway, and then you took a few steps down, and then there was this big living room. And I thought, I'm going to live in a house like that. You know, to me, that was like, wow, you've made it if you got it. It was a nice house. I sort of imprinted on that. Like that's what a good life looks like. Then I had all these ideas in high school and college that I would become a lawyer, or a doctor, or a business person, or international relations, maybe work for the UN. And the idea of making money doing something respectable was definitely appealing. But I gradually realized that none of that made me happy, and I just didn't even want to study medicine. Like I was pre-med, or I was thinking that I was pre-med for my first semester, and I just hated every course so much. And I found it hard. Like none of it came easily to me. And on the other hand, loved my history class. I was actually a history major because that was storytelling on this really epic and stakesy scale. Anyway, I think that the tension between what I wanted to do and what I ended up, having to kind of do in the meantime, that was hard. That was a constant emotional struggle for me anyway, because my parents were just always just so clearly disappointed in me. It's because they were refugees and immigrants and they had really struggled with hardships and no, like really no money. Like my mom, after the Japanese invaded, or I think maybe, yeah, this was during the Japanese occupation, she remembers digging through dumpsters for food. Like that's the level of stuff she went through. So it was really baffling to them that I would choose to be essentially broke when I had plenty of marketable skills. Like I would temp secretary and stuff, but I could have pursued a career of some sort instead of, living like a high school dropout. Then the Christmas that I came home during this time, I remember once my mom gave money to both my brother and me for Christmas. And we went to the bank and where she knew everybody. It's this little tiny one-room bank in Bangor, Maine. Just like reading all the tellers by name. Hi, Kim, how's the baby? Oh, Sally, thank you for the quarters. Because my mom collected quarters. And they'd call her when her quarter came in. And then she slides my envelope across the desk to the teller and whispers, she doesn't have a job. And I was like, why did you say that? And I sort of announced to the whole bank, I am working. I am doing this thing called coverage. I read scripts freelance and I am paying all my bills. I'm doing fine. I don't have like a lot of debt. And my mom said, I'm sorry, I don't know why I said that. And then she slides my brother's envelope across the counter and tells the teller, this one works. Later on, she said, well, I wanted to explain why I gave him less money. Anyway, so yes, lots of tension, and it was very draining for a while. And I finally learned to just live with it.
Well, like many successful people in entertainment, your path wasn't linear.
True.
And after you moved to Los Angeles,
Mhm.
you worked in HR, you served as a studio guide,
Yeah,
and you held all kinds of jobs while
right.
pursuing writing.
Hmm.
What did those early experiences teach you about perseverance?
Oh my goodness. Well, first that any job is better than driving the golf cart at Warner Brothers. And when I would go to the Warner Brothers lot to, do sound mixes as a showrunner, I wanted to run up to those tour guys and say, hang in there, it's going to work out, it can get better. But I shouldn't say any job. There were parts about that job that I liked a lot. And everyone is very nice, and the tour people were very appreciative, and everyone I worked with was nice. But when I got back to the kind of employee break room between tours, everybody would be reading Variety and trying to get an agent on the phone or working on their scripts. And it was just soul crushing because then I had to remember how far away I was from what I wanted to do. But anyway, so that job in some ways taught me the limit of what I was willing to do as a day job. I lasted 8 weeks and got a different job doing something else. I think I went to work as a post PA, which was cool. It was much closer to what I wanted to do. It was for a feature film. A friend from film school, just reached out and said, "Hey, do you want to be the runner?" Anyway, so that was a pretty good job. And then I got the job as a human resources person because it was much more stable. But I feel like those early jobs solidified my desire to do the thing that I wanted to do. And I think they just kind of reminded me that there was nothing else that was going to make me happy. I don't know. I just kind of got more and more resolved with each crappy job that I was not going to give up until I was a paid writer. And eventually that happened.
Well, you shared that you had submitted at one point a $30 application to Warner Brothers for this writer's workshop, and that's what changed everything. What do you remember about taking that step?
I remember that at the time I had been in the wilderness for maybe 7 years, and I was writing screenplays, and I would have staged readings or table reads with friends who were actors, and I'd buy them pizza, and that was fun, and it helped my writing. Like, you learn a lot about your writing when people are reading them, and things either make sense or work or don't work, and it's very helpful. But, after many years of that, you want to move beyond that. And I was dating somebody at the time, and he'd come from the industry too, and he was savvy about certain things. And he said, "You should apply for this thing called the Warner Brothers Writers Workshop." And I said, "Oh, I don't even watch TV. I work alone." And because I'd come out to be a screenwriter or maybe a novelist. And he kept nudging me. And finally, I was like, I guess that I could watch some reruns of Law and Order. That's on all the time. People seem to like it. Why do they like this show? I sat down with a yellow pad to chart the structure of a Law and Order because I didn't even know how to structure a TV script. And so I'm making notes like 0 seconds. Here are two guys moving a couch down a flight of stairs, and then one's complaining about it. Oh my God, they found a body. 30 seconds. The cops come, they talk about the clues and the defensive ones, and the body's been moved, and validity proves she's been dead for 8 hours, and somebody makes a joke about traffic. Title cards. 1 minute. And I taught myself TV structure from watching these reruns. And I got into the program partly because the sample I think was decent. And then probably the first day or at some point they said to us, your scripts were not necessarily the best scripts that we read, but your interviews were really good. Or it was more like, but your interviews were also really good. And at the time I was insulted. I was like, this is a writing program. What do you mean my script was not among the best? Why did you pick me? And now I realize, and as soon as I got into a writer's room, I was like, oh, I think they should actually weight it more towards the interview. It's much easier to train somebody up to write in the style of the show or to kind of smooth out or whatever, evolve their writing style. Way easier to do that than to educate somebody in how to read a room and how to get along with people and how to be collaborative and like be good at listening and be good at finding the moments to take initiative, but finding the moments to let things play out. And also just to be personable, to be someone you want to hang out with for 10 hours a day.
And when you first entered the industry as a quote unquote diversity writer, what did you learn about expectations in the writing room, both spoken and unspoken?
At the time, it was okay to say somebody was a diversity writer. It was a subsidized position. The network would pay your salary, and the show wouldn't have its budget impacted. And it was a way to give new writers a foot in the door. Nowadays, they still have fellowships. Disney, ABC still has a fellowship. Fox still has a fellowship. I think CBS does as well. And those salaries are subsidized, but they no longer call it diversity writer, even if those programs are meant to source new voices from underrepresented communities. It's just been so weaponized, the word diversity or the term DEI. It's really frustrating. But at the time, I realized gradually that I was seen as a bit of a charity case. Maybe not so much on the first show because they wanted to hire me and then they didn't have the budget. And then they decided that a backdoor way to hire me would be to call me a diversity writer, which I really appreciated. But the second time around, I was definitely they were like, the network says we have to hire a diversity writer. Let's meet people who are not white. And the perception can be sometimes among the staff like, oh, you're the free person who is not white. And then you have to work 3 times as hard to prove yourself, to prove that you deserve to be there. And if you underperform, which I've never seen a diversity writer underperform, but I have seen, unfortunately, have seen people who maybe people would have accused of like, and not even necessarily because of their identity, maybe because it was basically nepotism, that they got the job and people are like, ugh. But if that person happened to be a woman of color, then it makes it so much harder for everybody else. It's so frustrating when somebody is not performing because everybody, at least at, my age, coming up the ranks at the time that I did, you were among the few people in that room. There were many staffs where I was the only woman and the only person of color. And you really had to prove that folks who looked like you were not a liability.
Well, looking back, what did those experiences teach you about finding your voice in rooms where you weren't always expected to lead?
The first show that I was on, that was difficult. I really had a lot of trouble adjusting to the rhythm of pitching and understanding the dynamic in the room. So that was not successful for me, but I learned a lot. I learned how to do it better the next time. And I was a much better fit for the next show, both in terms of my personality and the rest of the group and like some skills I had learned along the way. And I learned to pick my battles, I think. It's sort of like it happened to be that on that particular show, I'm not thinking of the second show I was on. Sometimes the hierarchy was such that the number two in the room, if you didn't get the pitch past him, the showrunner would never hear the pitch. And I remember that once we all got collectively sort of spanked in the room for not having good ideas for an episode. And then I got stuck in the elevator with the showrunner on my way down to the ground floor where everybody was out like collecting themselves. And the number two in the room was having like a cigarette break, which whenever the writers were downstairs having a cigarette break with our number two, you could tell that we had just flamed out on some pitch in the room. So we were down there quite a bit. And the showrunner and I, we exited the building and the showrunner pointed to me and said, "She's got a great pitch for a B story." And number two looked at me kind of, and I was like, sorry, it sort of came up in conversation. And it was kind of unintentionally, it was kind of the wrong move politically. The number two forgave me for it. And it was, I think, good at the time because at least we had one part of the episode to start with. But technically, I wasn't supposed to do that. But I disagree with that. I feel like if everybody's trying to make the show better. The showrunner should hear all the pitches. The vetting process with the number two in the room, that's useful. Like, you kind of put together your thoughts and you present a consensus about what you've been workshopping. It's a time saver, but that doesn't mean that maybe these outlier ideas don't deserve to see the light of day in front of the showrunner. It's more for efficiency of workflow that you present one version. Anyway, and I remember that it was a good B story. It made it to the air, actually, if I may say so. It was always a good idea, number two. So the number two is not always right.
We're speaking with Melinda Hsu about her journey from a young storyteller in Maine to one of television's most respected writer-producers and showrunners. After the break, we'll explore what she learned behind the scenes of hit television shows and what she learned about the realities of leadership in high-pressure creative environments. Stay with us. Don't miss a thing. Follow Expressions of Leadership on your favorite podcast app and connect with us on Instagram and YouTube at Expressions of Leadership. Welcome back to Expressions of Leadership. I'm Michele Kawamoto Perry, and today I'm joined by Melinda Hsu, Emmy-nominated writer, producer, showrunner, and author of Lead with Kindness. Melinda, let's back up a bit. For listeners who may not know, what does a showrunner actually do?
The showrunner is sort of the CEO of the television show. They're in charge of the creative vision. They guide the scripts and the writing and the story breaking, meaning like which stories are we going to tell in the episode and what are the twists and turns and emotional developments going to be. They interface with the network, the studio, the actors, the production people. They supervise everything. They are where the buck stops. And they're in charge of making the budget work. I mean, you have a line producer who's telling you the reality of we can't shoot in the rain with these kids and dogs. It's just way too expensive. But within those constraints, it's up to you as the showrunner to find a really creative way to tell the story that you want to tell within the budget realities, the time realities of what you can do. And to make sure that everybody in all the departments is collaborating effectively and efficiently, and in my view, harmoniously is also very important. Not everybody subscribes to that, but I do, and it's why I wrote a book about it. It's like the results are so much better when people feel safe to innovate. And that's one of the key takeaways of the book. And it greatly frustrates me when people think that, oh, well, because I'm toxic and because I have an iron grip on everything, that's why the show is the way it is. I always want to say, wouldn't it be better if you didn't focus all that energy on micromanaging people and being harsh? If they felt like they didn't have to run around and hide from you and look for their next job and feel pissed off because of how you're treating them, what if that energy went towards making the show better? But the showrunner is in charge of every single thing on the show. And there are like several hundred people, many millions of dollars, and dozens of moving parts at any moment in the show, like literally. Casting, costumes, post-production, press tours, the actors' mental health, the crew's physical safety. Can we get the location? What is the story we want to tell? The network disagrees that that's the kind of story the show can do. The studio thinks that we could do that, but we can't afford it. It's like all of these different forces, and everybody wants the same thing, which is a hit show that people like. But there are many roads up the mountain, and you're trying to navigate on behalf of all these people who are meant to work together creatively in the midst of like ego and politics and financial burdens and just real world, I don't know, limitations. It's a really fun job. It's really interesting.
And you worked on some major shows like Lost and The Vampire Diaries during formative parts of your career.
Mhm, mhm.
What did you observe about how those rooms actually function day to day?
Well, I've gone on the record in this great book called Burn It Down with Maureen Ryan about the dysfunction and toxicity that happened in the room at Lost. And this was not to demonize anybody. In fact, I would say, part of the problem because I was keeping my head down and laughing at these very inappropriate jokes, for instance. But if I hadn't, I did feel like I was going to get fired, you know? So it was that kind of culture. But I feel like what I observed was a lot of dysfunction that was really not necessary, that kind of came from habit and that was not as productive to the show as a healthier attitude would have been. I think that in some of those shows, a variety of kind of thought processes, I think, were, for instance, if we don't do it my way, it's wrong and the show is going to suffer. I mean, just that thought alone is going to really slow down the workflow. It could be great if you have all the time in the world, but if you're on a network schedule, as we were in those two shows, you don't have the luxury of creating a bottleneck, and yet bottlenecks happened all the time. And then everybody else is scrambling behind you to make up for lost time, which costs more money and demoralizes people and leads to work that is not good or not as good. So even though you think that you're helping the show by controlling everything, every word, every choice, every, creative decision, you're actually not helping the show. And then the other thing that I noticed, sometimes people are afraid for no reason. I tell a story in the book, actually. I was working for Julie Plec, who is great, and I'm working with her again now. But people were a little bit afraid of Julie, and I think that everybody would acknowledge this to her. And I'd written a script. We were ready to send it to production if Julie signed off on it. And we were very close to the moment in time where we were going to get a fine from the Directors Guild because we weren't going to have a script published to production, meaning like, here's the production draft. There's the kind of official distribution that goes out. And the production was going to suffer, like in terms of they were going to have to play catch up, rush orders, late kind of, when you have to get things, everything gets shipped overnight instead of we have a minute to go out and get the thing from the store. That all of that adds up, and people are running around trying to put out fires, and it's totally unnecessary if you can just get them the script several days earlier. And then I said, could we just send the script to Julie? And one of my supervisors said, well, I don't want to rush her. And I'm like, we're not rushing her. She also wants the show to come in on time. And, what, are we children? Like, rush her. We're professionals. We're all working on a show that has millions of dollars at stake. And I talked to my life coach about this, and she said, why don't you email Julie? So I sent this email saying, Julie, would it be possible for you to read the script by this afternoon or by tonight? Because that way we can send it to production and keep everything moving on schedule. And she wrote back, sure, I'll read it on the plane today. I was like, you see, it wasn't that hard. And so that was a great lesson to me, that all of this culture of fear and tiptoeing around and, trying to read people's minds, it's actually not nearly as necessary. It's almost never necessary. And it's really not necessary to the extent that people make it to be.
Well, in those early experiences, what stood out to you about the difference between strong leadership and reactive leadership?
I did admire creatively that the leaders of, I would say, just about every show I've been on, and especially Lost in the Vampire Diaries, people had a very clear vision for what they wanted. And that is commendable because I would say like a close second to somebody who's micromanaging is somebody who doesn't know what they want. Sometimes those two things overlap when that's very difficult to work for. But if people have a really clear vision for what they want, at least you can strive towards that. That was the main thing. That is, it's very helpful to have a clear vision, but your job really is to provide clarity and answers. And sometimes the answer can be, I don't know yet, but I'll tell you Friday, or on Friday, I'll know when I'm going to have an answer for you. That's so empowering to people as opposed to like, I wonder if they got my email. Or I've already sent them two text messages. I can't triple text them. All of that frustration and energy drain is totally unnecessary if people, writers in this instance, but people generally could embrace the discomfort or get used to the discomfort, tolerate the discomfort of saying to somebody, I don't have the answer. Because so much gets left unsaid with people who don't want to look stupid or unprepared, or they're worried that they'll be less powerful if people realize that they haven't got it all figured out. But guess what? The crew knows you haven't got it all figured out because we haven't heard from you in 2 days. That's what
Mhm.
happens when somebody doesn't have it all figured out. You're telling me anyway. Why not get out in front of it?
In high pressure environments like TV writers' rooms and production sets where stakes are high, as you said, timelines are tight, and collaboration needs to be constant. How do you balance high standards and accountability while still creating psychological safety for the people that you're leading?
I think that it's mostly about trust and fostering an atmosphere of possibility. That's a Kenneth Branagh quote, which I like a lot. It's something he talked about. I was reading this interview after he had directed Cinderella, the live action Cinderella, which I'm a big fan of. I don't apologize for that. And there's this great scene, the ballroom scene. She shows up in the dress and the prince is there. And they lock eyes and she comes down the stairs. It's fantastic. And he filmed it with like 500 extras and a live orchestra and candles in the chandeliers. And he filmed it in a single take when they did the big wide shots of her coming down the stairs and they danced this whole waltz and everybody's, ooh. It's a great sequence. But in the middle of, this kind of scene where she comes down and they come face to face on the dance floor and he asks her to dance and he puts his hand on the small of her back. In the interview, Kenneth Branagh said, that's the shot that I started with. The hand is like this big. And that's the thing that Kenneth Branagh started that enormous sequence with, even though there were all these ladies in hoop skirts and people like tuning their instruments and candles melting in the chandeliers. He said it wasn't efficient. And I had a lot of people on like the camera people or the assistant director kind of pulling their hair and being like, do you really have to start with the shot of the hand on her back? And he said, that's the shot that the scene is entirely about. We have to start with the most important moment, not the most efficient moment in terms of the camera angles. And I love that piece of advice. And he said that the other thing he did on that shoot was foster an atmosphere of possibility so that crew members and, department heads were really creating at the top of their game and felt like, oh, I'm going to have a bold idea and it's going to be welcomed, even if it doesn't work out. So that's really important.
Let's take a quick break. When we return, we'll talk about the current state of the entertainment industry and how Linda's helping to develop the next generation of leaders. We'll be right back. Leadership isn't just about strategy, it's about people. The Forward Project helps organizations cultivate strong, adaptable leaders who create thriving workplace cultures. If you're ready to invest in your leadership team, visit www.theforwardproject.co to learn how. This is Expressions of Leadership. I'm Michele Kawamoto Perry, and my guest today is Melinda Hsu, author, Emmy-nominated writer-producer, and showrunner, whose career spans Lost, The Vampire Diaries, and Nancy Drew. Melinda, the entertainment industry is currently undergoing tremendous change.
Hmm.
What are some of the biggest shifts that you're seeing today?
Contraction, unfortunately. I'm on the board of directors of the Writers Guild, and somebody asked me yesterday, hey, does the guild think that we're turning a corner? And I said, I don't want to sugarcoat this for you. No, we're not turning a corner. The contraction is here to stay. This is the new normal. I suppose the minorly good news is that I do see signs of stability. I wouldn't say like robust life, but stability in terms of people are hiring, people, shows are getting made. It's just like way fewer shows. But my barometer is always how many people are reaching out to me per week for recommendations for shows. And I'm getting a steady trickle again. Like right after the strikes, it was just flatlined. There were no people hiring. But now, with some regularity, a writer who I've worked with before will say, "Hey, I'm up for a job on such and such. Could you put in a good word for me?" So there's that. But that's one change. The looming threat of AI is definitely something we all talk about. It's interesting. I had a long conversation with somebody a couple days ago who's coming from a different field, but he's very interested in AI, and he was asking like how I felt about it. And I said I have mixed feelings. I'm very against it in terms of the writing. I feel like the left turns that a human or a group of humans is going to come up with are by definition going to be better than what AI can produce because AI just scrubs through what it knows. By definition, it can only tell you a version of what has already been tried. At least that's my understanding of it. But as far as things like visual effects, that could be really helpful. I admit that. And I'm not sure how I feel about it generally. Like, I do know I find it annoying if executives are using it. Like, we can't prove that their notes are generated by AI, but they feel like they're being generated by AI sometimes, or that AI is helping them put together their thoughts. Because there's a certain rambling quality to an AI paragraph. And it's like there are so many words being used to summarize something that could be said much more quickly. The other time that I knew that it was AI, I was working on the Buffy the Vampire Slayer reboot, and we were trying to title it. And we were all trying to come up with interesting titles. It eventually ended up being called Buffy the Vampire, colon, New Sunnydale, or maybe Buffy, colon, New Sunnydale. And there were many, many go-rounds with the marketing department and all of us putting our heads together, and everybody's trying to think of a title for it. But they sent us these lists. It was pages and pages of titles. And we know it was AI because we were like, this must be AI. And we entered a prompt. What's a good title for the Buffy the Vampire Slayer reboot? And we got like a very similar long list, like with many, many overlapping titles. But one of the titles was Portal to Next. What does that mean? But it cracked us up because I'm not sure how the AI fed on itself until that came out as like, oh, this would be a good title that says what Buffy the Vampire Slayer and the new generation is. Like, anyway. So for those reasons, I don't really trust it. It's just kind of like, it's useful sometimes, and sometimes it's just ridiculously bad at what it's being asked to do.
Well, in addition to the complications that AI presents, you've also spoken about a growing gap where writers have high level titles, but
Oh,
not
yeah.
always the same level of production experience as previous generations. Can
Yes.
you talk a bit more about that gap and the challenges that are associated with that?
Sure. So, as we got into the streaming boom, like 2019-ish, 2018, and even right after the pandemic, they would have all these things called mini rooms, which would be a group of writers working for a flat fee, kind of like Uber drivers or something, and hopping from project to project, writing six scripts, maybe pre-green lighting rooms, or before the thing was ordered to series. So it's just like Netflix would say, write us 10 scripts, show us what this show would be like, and then we'll decide based on these scripts whether we'll actually start filming it. And these rooms got so common that the good part of it was that a lot of people were working. The bad part of it was that there was this downward pressure on Netflix and a lot of the studios saying like, nope, $10,000, for I don't know if it was a week or whatever it was. I mean, and that's a lot of money. I don't mean to cry poverty. However, the trend of it, the problem of it was that it was making it a non-issue how much experience you had in the union. So if I joined a mini room, I would get paid the exact same rate as somebody who joined the guild last week. And to me, it felt not unreasonable to be paid differently after 20 years on the job, especially when it's not like we're not assembling widgets. We are actually bringing a lot of experience. It's completely different. Not to toot my own horn, but you would hope that after 20 something years in the business, it's very different to hand me an episode that has like, we want it to be, I don't know, we want it to be about a heist. We want it to involve a lab, and we want this romantic storyline to make some progress. My work at the end of the day is going to look very different from somebody who joined the guild last week. So I think that that was one thing that started to be a downward pressure. And what happened at the same time was that people were going from show to show and getting a promotion because everybody's agents are very industrious and you want to get a title bump every time you go on to your next project. So you might have somebody who had risen through the ranks in this way, but they had risen through the ranks 6 episodes at a time, as opposed to somebody like me, who, if I got a title bump, it was after 22 episodes in the field, basically. Like Vampire Diaries, we did everything from casting and costume choices all the way to the sound mix. And I was on the ground in Atlanta producing these episodes, being on set all day long, talking to the actors, figuring out the blocking with the director, seeing what the problem is when it rains or when we run out of time in a location and we're supposed to have a werewolf ritual and we can't do it now. Like, these things have all happened to me. So those people who had these very high titles would come on to jobs and you'd expect them to have the level of experience, the kind of holistic level of experience that somebody like me had. And they would ask these very kind of rookie questions. And you'd be like, oh my God, why are we having to teach them to play catch up while we're paying them all this money? And they expect all this stuff from their next job. So that was one part of problem internally. Now, however, on the other side of the strike, when people are hiring fewer writers for fewer shows, there's a whole group of people that was rising through the ranks and they have these pretty high titles, but they're having trouble getting hired because even though their title says co-producer, they've never been to set. However, there are people who have been to set who have come up more slowly as co-producer or producer. So as a showrunner or as a studio or a network, you'd rather hire the producer or the co-executive producer, much higher level, who, my age came up with a lot of set experience, as opposed to somebody who's co-producer or producer level who's never been to set. Like you're going to get more bang for your buck. But what has resulted is that the whole middle class of writers in the guild is really, really struggling to get jobs right now. And I really feel for them. It is a huge problem. And these are often people who are really active on the picket lines, who really helped us get through the strike. They feel very left behind. And that's a problem we're trying to address.
So, what leadership challenges have you seen emerge when the next generation isn't being developed effectively?
I think one thing is that people literally don't know what to do when they're on the spot. And so, in some ways, the studios and the networks and other showrunners are just leaning on the people they've already worked with, the kind of sure bets or friends or known commodities. And there's nothing wrong with leaning on some of that, but there's such a reluctance to bring up new voices. And those voices are often disproportionately people from underrepresented communities. So there's a lot of data out that it's not as easy right now to be heard if you're not, coming from a group of people who's been working for years already. And, I'm in that group. I am very fortunate. So it's not purely along like lines of ethnicity or gender, but it's more just kind of new voices versus very established people, put it that way. So that's a problem because then the more time goes by with these new people not getting trained up the ranks, we're eventually going to have a big gap. Like right now, it's fine because there are still so many of us who have a number of years left in our career. I don't think it's going to be a giant gap in leadership for several years yet. I couldn't tell you exactly how many. But at a certain point, if we don't train up this middle class, the kind of emerging leaders, then we will come to a point where studios like Marvel will be like, oh, we don't even want a showrunner. We're just going to call it a head writer and put a production executive in charge of some of the stuff, which is very, it takes away the power of the Writers Guild and it takes away kind of the craft that we've all been after. So that's a problem. I mean, one of the reasons that I joined the board of the guild or ran for the board is because I wanted to do this thing called the leadership training program. And I ran kind of on that platform. Friends of mine had already gotten it kind of to the 10-yard line. But this friend of mine, Nicole Yorkin, said, I'm terming out this year. I would love it if you'd join the board and help me get this thing across the finish line, which we did. And part of what we're doing is bridging that gap between, okay, you've got a title, but you've never been to set or you haven't been to set that much, or you've never really workshopped a thing with a director and an actor. Like, what is it when you have to work out the blocking in a new location or just all this kind of very practical stuff. So that's been really helpful. But a lot of the class is also about culture change, which was my whole thing. I was like, I really want to make this mandatory. We couldn't make it mandatory for bylaw reasons, but I really want as many people as possible to come through this class and understand that there are best practices, that there are standards that the Guild highly recommends. The way the Guild is constructed, we can't enforce these standards exactly. We can offer reporting mechanisms. There's something called My Connect, where if you feel that you've been targeted by a toxic workplace or harassed, you can anonymously submit an incident report, essentially. And if there are more than one person, saying X showrunner is doing this, then they kind of aggregate it. The database will do this, and then there will be a reach out to that showrunner and say, "Hey, did you know that what you're doing is not according to California labor laws or something?" But it's a self-reporting mechanism, and it's hard to get people to do that because there's always the fear of retaliation. So one of the things we can do is train people on what they should be doing and hope that as those rising leaders populate the ranks more, that the culture slowly changes. And I do think it is changing. I just wish it were changing faster.
We're going to take a short break, and when we return, we'll dive into the ideas behind Melinda's book, Lead with Kindness. Stay tuned. Are you looking to connect with an audience passionate about leadership, growth, and success? Become a sponsor of Expressions of Leadership and align your brand with inspiring conversations that make an impact. Contact us at letstalk@expressionsofleadership.com to explore sponsorship opportunities. Welcome back to Expressions of Leadership. I'm Michele Kawamoto Perry, and today I'm speaking with Melinda Hsu, author of Lead with Kindness and an Emmy-nominated writer-producer. Melinda, what was it that ultimately inspired you to write the book Lead with Kindness at this time in your career?
The strike, really. I had a couple of moments on the picket lines where I became picket line famous for about 15 minutes. I was like, two things happened. One was very early in the strike. I got interviewed by an Asian reporter from Japan, and she has this networker that she works for. It was all like anime fans, really. And she's very sweet. And I was like, I can't leave the Asian lady hanging because she was trying to get people to talk to her. So I went up to her and said, she said, can you explain for our viewers why the Writers Guild is on strike? So I knew I was speaking to an audience that didn't understand the kind of the guild politics, the studio system, and also that, maybe English wasn't their first language. So I really broke it down. And because I said it so simply and concisely, it went viral because everybody started sending it to their aunt in Iowa who didn't understand why we were all marching around the studios. And then shortly after that, there was an article in Vanity Fair that also was sort of viral. And it was from this book, Burn It Down. Mo Ryan had written this expose about toxic behavior in workplaces in Hollywood. And I went on the record talking about things that had happened in the writer's room at Lost. And people once again would come up to me and say, "Oh my God, so good that you went on the record. I can't believe that happened." And by the way, when I went on the record, it wasn't kind of like demonizing people. I was really just saying, this happened. The impact was really hard. Because I do think that people want to get better, and I think that everyone deserves a second chance. Truly, I do. And I also know that sometimes people get things swept under the rug, and that's really demoralizing and kind of part of the toxicity and dysfunction that you're made to think that it never happened. And that's not okay. So I think part of the accountability process is just saying out loud, this happened and it wasn't okay. So I talked about that, and people would come up to me on the picket lines and say, "How did that evolve? What was the complex nuance of, the kind of ecosystem?" And I would be like, "It's not complex at all. There was no evolution, really. If the leaders had once walked up to us and said, treat each other with kindness. We want to see that. We want to see you show professionalism. That will please us." We would have radically changed our behavior. And like I said, I was, among the we who was not behaving as my best self. I have also evolved since then. And I started to feel like it wasn't rocket science. And for a long time, I wanted to call this program, It's Not Rocket Science. But eventually we settled on Leadership Training Program. We thought that was more professional. But I would talk to people on the picket line for all these hours that we were circling the studios about things that they had been through and the dysfunctions. And they were like, "I'm so glad that you do it differently. It sounds like everybody who's worked for you has had a really good experience, and you were very intentional about creating a humane and accountable, transparent culture at Nancy Drew. And people got the half day for Halloween, and they could go home and be with their kids or just go enjoy a party if that was what they were doing that day." And it was really encouraging to me to hear how much people resonated with what I was saying. And then my manager said, "Do you have any interest doing a podcast?" And I said, "I'm so bored right now. I made a salad last night. Yes, I would love to do a podcast. I'd love to do anything." And I got together friends who I'd worked with or former colleagues or people from slightly other walks of life. And we talked about these 10 different ideas. There's trust, kindness, inclusion, love, calm, transparency, accountability, safety, service, work-life integration. Not in that order, but those are the chapters of the book. They're originally the episodes of the podcast. And my agent, Anne Blanchard, came on the podcast, the service episode. And afterwards, she said, honey, this could be a book. And so she connected me with Anthony Matero, CAA publishing agent in New York. He helped me put together a book proposal, and then we got a publisher. And then I wrote the book, and there it is. It's so fun. I'm really psyched about it. It's delightful that something that was just sort of something that I was passionate about and ideas that I wanted to spread is now a book. It's amazing.
And how did those themes that you spoke about, like trust and inclusion and accountability, emerge from what you experienced in the entertainment industry over the years?
Some of it was from what I did not experience, and I made a list as I was coming up the ranks. Here's how I'm going to do it differently. I mean, just for instance, transparency. I remember working on a show, and I really loved everybody there, and I loved the show, but I turned in a script that I thought was really good. And my boss said, nice work. And about a week or so later, I got the script back, and every single line had changed. It was a page one rewrite, almost like everything except the slug lines. And my name was still on the cover, and nobody told me what I did wrong. I guess I could have gone and asked them. I mean, it was a bit of unfortunate timing that my dad had just passed away, so I think they just didn't want to like hurt my feelings by saying your script doesn't work for us at all. Regardless, I wrote down on my little manifesto of how I was going to do things differently when I was a showrunner. When I have notes on a writer's script, I'm going to sit with them and explain why I want to change things. I'm going to give them another shot if we have time. And if we don't have time, while I do it, I'm going to have them sit with me and I'm going to take them through the process. And I do that now, and it's really fun for me. And it's much better to have the writer with you. They'll be like, "Oh, what I meant was that," and then we kind of workshop things and bounce things around. It takes maybe a little longer than me just doing all the changes myself. But what that buys you in labor hours later is that now they know how to do it. They know what they're supposed to be doing. Otherwise, they can't read your mind. They certainly can't read your mind if you tell them nothing about why you've changed their stuff. So that was one thing, like just lists of things that I did along the way. I personally know how elevating it is to be included in something. And I could see the people we worked with on Nancy Drew and Tom Swift were really smart about being very intentional, whether it was in the hiring process or when they talked to the crew. We had a director named Ruben Garcia. He's still wildly successful doing stuff, but I really admired how he would say to everybody, this is how the shot's going to be set up because this is the story we're telling. We're going to let the audience know we're walking into this big creepy space. We've never been here before. We're going to have, an overhead shot of all our heroes kind of walking through this hallway. Don't worry about this too much, actors. He says, we're barely going to see your faces, but then we're going to come down to ground level off of the balcony and we're going to go two by two. These two people have an interaction. This person's really important in the storyline. Finally, we're going to end with a close up on Nancy Drew when she opens the gate, and that's going to be a big moment. So now every single person on set, and this is 200 people, are, looking at not just, oh, I need to pump the dry ice now, but like I'm creating this audience experience that's going to roll out in such and such a way, and this is how we're achieving it as a team. So that's really what I mean by inclusion. On the one hand, I also mean it in the more traditional senses. But all of those things, like along the way, I was just seeing how it worked when you did it well, or when you gave people this option, or trust, like in the chapter on trust. I realized as I was writing the book, like, oh, I do know how to establish trust in a team, or at least try to build trust. And I would have these little pro tips, like tell people you're going to do something to benefit them, and then deliver on that promise over and over and over again. So if you say to them, we're going to start the meeting on time, start the meeting on time every day, they will learn that you can be taken at your word. And then when you say, I'm going to ask you to work this weekend, and I'm going to suggest that everybody take Monday morning off, they'll know that, okay, well, that's actually how it's going to play out. So they just feel safe and they are able to step up for you when they need it. And also, don't overplay that. But I've found so many times that when you're like really, really, really respectful of people's time, they will just like move mountains for you. That's all people want on some level. I mean, they want to be seen and understood, but they also just want their boundaries respected. And they want to know that their contributions are going to make it onto TV or in some way contribute to the thing that gets onto TV. That's basically managing TV stuff.
Well, what have you learned about giving direction in a way that supports creativity rather than shutting it down?
I think just on set with actors, I'll start there. If you start with the desired outcome, this is also true of management. But if you say, I really need more urgency, don't give them a line reading. That's very insulting to them. They hate that. But if you say that that moment needs to feel a lot more urgent because I need the audience to remember there's a ticking clock in the search for this mystical relic. And they'll be like, oh, got it. And they'll know how to do that internally. They have their own process to like suddenly the next take, it's like super urgent. But then in the writer's room, I'm a big yes-ander, even if somebody has voiced an idea that is taking us in a direction that I don't think is going to be helpful, I will say it in a very welcoming way, kind of like, I love that for a different episode. I feel like in this episode, we're trying to make this really simple, so we should save that idea for another episode because it's really cool. And I'll write it down in a card and put it on the board. So being very welcoming and affirming, even when a pitch isn't going to be the thing that we go with, I think when you have the attitude that there really aren't pitches that I don't like, there are only pitches that won't work for this particular episode or I don't think are quite the right way to go for this episode, but let's put them over here and come back to them another time. And then there are also pitches that I think are great for this episode. So you can only succeed. You'll succeed for the future or you'll succeed for this episode.
We're going to take one final break. When we come back, we'll look ahead to see what Melinda sees changing in the industry, what she hopes the next generation experiences differently, and what legacy she's building through her work. Don't go anywhere. True transformation starts from within. The Forward Project partners with organizations to create meaningful culture shifts and develop leaders who inspire real change. If your team is ready to move forward with purpose, visit www.theforwardproject.co. Welcome back to Expressions of Leadership. I'm Michele Kawamoto Perry, and I'm joined by Melinda Hsu, writer, producer, showrunner, and author and podcast host of Lead with Kindness. So, Melinda, if you look 10 years ahead, what kind of entertainment industry do you hope that we're creating for the next generation of writers and creators and storytellers?
My hope for 10 years from now is that lots and lots and lots of voices, all the voices, are celebrated and included, not in spite of what they are, but because of what they are, because they're unique and intersectional and interesting and different. That there would be enough stories that people could bridge these divides in the country, really. I mean, I think one of the frustrating things as a storyteller right now is that people are in echo chambers. It's not just in storytelling, it's in every walk of life. People have retreated to their corners and are not that interested necessarily in listening to something from a point of view that they might not identify with. But I'm hopeful that if we tell stories the right way and include people from, maybe points of views that we don't agree with, I might have a story where there's somebody who has, I don't know, a viewpoint that it's just like not how I would ever look at it. However, if in my storytelling that person can feel like, well, at least I'm understood the way I want to be understood. At least they see me. They're not making me the butt of a joke. They're not demonizing me. They're kind of like, this is a way that this person has experienced the world and this is their take on things. And so that's my hope, that there's more togetherness through storytelling instead of the current apartness.
When people look back on your work across writing, producing, mentoring, and leadership, what do you hope that they say about the imprint that you've made?
I hope that they say that I was really true to my motto, which is lift up the people you can reach. That they say, because I heard Melinda speak once, or I read her book, or I worked with her, or I knew somebody worked with her, I realized it was possible for me to do that. I realized that it was possible to see the best in another person and actually bring that out of them intentionally.
And for listeners who want to learn more about your work or listen to the Lead with Kindness podcast or pick up the book or follow what you're working on next, where should they go?
On Instagram, I am at Melinda HSULA. So that's the best way to get the current updates. I'm going to have a website, melindahsu.com, very shortly. So that's going to be another place to go.
Well, now it's time for our Wisdom and Whimsy segment of the show, where I get to ask the guest one advice question and one fun question. Let's begin with the advice question. What's a lesson that you learned the hard way that you now try to share with younger writers and creators?
Don't take it personally. I took everything personally as a younger writer, not just like the notes on my writing or how the room went that day or how people, interacted with me when we were getting our coffee in the morning. Everything was like, oh, they don't like me, or I did it wrong, or I'm a terrible person because I did it wrong, or I was just, a ball of nerves at the time. And I've gotten way better with a lot of therapy. and age, realizing most of the time it's not about me. If somebody has an opinion on, how I made my coffee today or whatever, or if they're like a particular kind of personality, that is them being them, and it's not about me. There's nothing I've done wrong. But as far as the work, very importantly, the notes are about the work. They're not about you as a person. I used to take it so hard when people didn't like applaud my work and, want to shoot it right away with no changes. Like I held myself to this A plus good girl standard, having been raised in this Asian household. Whereas like anything less than 100% on the test was failure and you're a bad person. That's just an exhausting way to live, and that way lies madness. So don't take it personally. It is about the work and it's about the other person, and just, keep your side of the street clean and maintain internal calm.
And now for the fun question. You've spent your career creating stories. If you could jump into any television show as a character for one episode, which would you choose and why?
Well, if it's any show, it would be Star Trek: The Next Generation. And I would be a new fictional character, a recurring character who had like the power of telekinesis to like move things around. And I think I would be part of a mission where they kind of encountered me on a planet and realized that I was really helpful, having adventures and becoming part of the crew, and then going off to Starfleet Academy to, officially train to be part of Starfleet. That is what I would want.
Well, Melinda, thank you so much for joining us on Expressions of Leadership. I appreciate you sharing your journey with us. As your story demonstrates, leadership is built moment by moment in how people communicate, how they make decisions, and how they treat each other under pressure.
Thank you so much. It's been wonderful to talk to you.
And to our audience, if you enjoyed this episode, please follow, subscribe, and share it with someone who would benefit from this conversation. You can also connect with us on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. I'm Michele Kawamoto Perry, and this is Expressions of Leadership. Until next time, remember, leadership is expressed in how we create together, how we show up in moments of pressure, and how we treat people along the way. If you haven't done so already, make sure to click on that follow button so you don't miss out on future episodes. Have a guest you'd like us to interview? Questions, ideas, or just want to say hello? You can reach us at letstalk@expressionsofleadership.com or connect with us on Instagram or YouTube. We'd love to hear from you. And as always, thanks to our amazing team behind the scenes for making this podcast possible, including our sound engineer, Graham Palmer, and my chief encourager and advisor, Jeremiah Higgins.